Sometimes an interview is pure fun. This is one of those times. My guests are Maggie Branath and Noel Caraccio, both involved in a Westchester law practice, but embarking on a new career as joint writers of fiction. Okay, not such a new idea. Think John Grisham and Scott Turow. Lots of lawyers dream of writing novels, but few actually publish one. Well, my guests today have done it. Secrets Change Everything, while self-published in 2013, is an engaging and well-written read. Here's a brief synopsis. Fanny kept a huge secret from her teenage daughter, Abby, with whom she had a strained relationship. Many years after Fanny's death, she comes back, okay, suspend your disbelief, and discloses a long-buried secret, which leads to blackmail, intrigue, and murder. When Fanny returns from the afterlife, she helps Abby save Rick, a bereft young man determined to commit suicide. Rick's encounter with Abby turns out to be predetermined, since Fanny knows Rick will be the key to unlocking the secret. Rick and Abby's friendship develops, brings Abby closer to learning the truth about past events, and charts Rick on his own journey to recovery. Abby, like her own mother, has kept a secret from her children. Everyone learns that family secrets have a way of unraveling and changing the lives of everyone involved. I hope you'll stay with us for my chat with new novelists Maggie Branath and Noel Caraccio. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village 2. Welcome to my guests, Noel and Maggie. Maggie, I seem to have made you a lawyer too, but I didn't.
I like that.
But you did write this novel together.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
Noel, first question to you. What made you think that you could write a novel?
I've always wanted to do it. I was an English major in college. I had a Danforth Fellowship for a PhD in English, and I knew at that point there were no jobs. And I said, I can't go to graduate school and come out with no job. And so my second choice was to go to law school. But I've always wanted to write. And when I met Maggie and she talked about her idea for a novel, it seemed like the perfect meeting of a need and a resource.
Now, how did you two get together? I mean, you're not in the practice together.
Right.
I thought at first that you were. So how did your friendship evolve?
I worked as a physical therapist and at Rye Physical Therapy, and she was my patient, and we became friends and had a lot of laughs during the encounter. And again, as she had stated, that we both wanted to write, and I had this story that I wanted to present. And anybody that's a dog lover, this was a story, a preteen story about my dog who had since passed away, but I wanted to have a little legacy for her because she was such a fantastic dog. And that blossomed into more of an adult book eventually after we started writing.
Now, do you think either of you would have embarked on this alone?
That's a good question.
I think that it
Possibly.
was, I think together we were a stronger force than we would have been individually. Maggie, I think, had a lot of the ideas for the story, and we'd talk about them, and then I probably did more of the writing than Maggie. But then we'd get back together and we'd read what I had written, edit it, fight about it, laugh about it. I mean, sometimes we were crying, we were laughing so hard about mistakes or things we thought to do.
Storyline.
But there was a fortuitous meeting of the need and the resource that I think either of us alone would have said we'd love to do it, but maybe we wouldn't have had the impetus without the other.
I always think collaboration is just so important, and you look at some of the great partnerships in the world, and you know, it's sort of amazing to me that people ever do anything all by themselves. And I don't think anyone ever does. I think some people fail to give credit to their collaborators. But I've always wondered how people write a novel together. I've heard of artists who who start a piece of work. In fact, I think it was Max Ernst and his group, and Salvador Dali did this actually as a joke, where they each did a little bit of a painting and passed it along to each other and made some kind of concoction, which became treasured as art. But how do you write together? How do you, I mean, do you argue over the grammar? Do you argue over every paragraph? I mean, how does this work?
Pretty much. I would come up with a storyline. And this story is about my mother, and what you read in the book is...
Is Fanny your mom?
Fanny was my mother, and what you read in the book is pretty much how she was.
Feisty lady.
Oh, she was. Yes, she was. And so writing about her, and Abby is very loosely based on myself, and so you write what you know. But we started this book, and the story began to blossom, and as it progressed, I would tell Noel, and so she would go ahead and start writing, and then we would go ahead and get together, and we'd read it, and then we'd edit it, and we'd either fight about this is not correct or that's not correct, or this story should follow this way, this is how I think it should go, and we butted heads a lot, and we became, but we finally got it.
Did you use the Microsoft Word
Yes.
processor where you sent it to each other and then you could edit it and go back and forth? Those give me a headache.
We started on Google, which was nice, and because we could type at the same time, and you could edit and write at the same time, but then the story became too large, and it didn't have the holding.
So did you find that most of the time when you were writing, you were in the same room doing that? Okay, so
Well, some of the time.
Sometimes.
As I said, some of it I would write, and then I'd send it to Maggie. I'd email it to her, and then we'd get together and we'd talk about it. I mean, we literally sometimes fought about one word. I want to include this word, and Maggie didn't want to do it. And sometimes we fought about it, and that's okay. One of the nicest compliments we got, though, is we've had people say to us, "I can't tell who wrote what. I don't see any difference."
Right,
So there
it
is
was one voice. It absolutely was. There's no question.
Which is
How long
unique,
did it
I
take you to
think.
do that?
I think it took us about 2 years.
2 years.
And the friendship survived? You're still
Surprisingly,
here.
yeah.
I haven't seen
And
any.
working on a second.
Are you?
Yes.
Good for you. Now, did you ever consider engaging an editor?
We did. We had a
did.
professional
we
editor.
had,
Oh, good.
yes, with
Okay.
CreateSpace, who we self-published with, and you
Okay.
can have an editor do that. And
Let's
which
talk
helped a
about
lot.
that. I mean, I'm meeting more and more people who are self-publishing. How do you do that?
I went on the internet, found CreateSpace, and we wanted that was the medium.
CreateSpace?
CreateSpace, which is part of Amazon.
Okay.
And that was a good way to get the book in the market, because immediately once you publish, it goes right on Amazon, it goes on Kindle. So that was a good way to get it out to the public.
Did you ever try to find a publisher the old-fashioned way?
We didn't have a whole lot of hope that as brand new writers we
Right.
would get an agent or a publisher to do that. We did engage a professional editor, and it was very interesting because the comments that he made were, "This is a wonderful ensemble novel. He liked all the characters." Originally we thought Fanny was the main character, but we're finding from our readers that it seems like depending on the age of the reader, who they like the best, they don't seem to think that Fanny is the main character. Some people think Abby's the main character. The men tend to identify with Rick very strongly. So that was...
How do people communicate with you? Do you have a website?
We do. It's down right now. We're putting up a new website, so that's in the finishing process.
What kind of comments do you get from your readers?
We've had if you go on Amazon and just type in the name of the book, it takes you right to it. We have a number of people who reviewed the book, and what's so gratifying is that we don't know all the people who've put in a comment. Seems to be what we get is it was an engaging read. We couldn't put it down. That's thrilling for us. We had one person tell us that she read till 11:30 one night, read till 12:30 the next night, and said, "I hate you because I had to get up to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning."
Bummer.
Yeah.
Bummer. Now, when you self-publish, so you actually work with Amazon, you submit it to Amazon, and voila, they publish a hard copy book?
You have a main person that you work with, the editor and the chief of CreateSpace, and then he gives you a team. And the only drawback from that is that you never get the same team. It's always a different group of people that you talk with if you have an issue with the book and you're writing and you have any questions, you
I see.
call up and they answer your questions right away. They call you back immediately, which is nice. But you never seem to get the same people twice until you really are forceful enough to ask for that. So that was a little bit
you learn that
difficult.
you can-
learn, right.
Right.
So as far as the editing goes, I found it extremely helpful because in writing, being that we've never been published before in authors, he condensed a lot of what we had written into a more simplified form so that you could say just as much but with less words.
Okay.
So that was helpful in that sense. And it was just a creative aspect that he gave you a different way to look at the storyline or how you wanted it to go or what he thought. And he gave you his ideas, not that you had to use them, but it was a good way to just to put that all together.
Now, I've heard of some people who work with an editor and they really get into loggerheads, where an editor
Right.
sees things quite differently.
Right.
Did you find that you were of a similar mind together?
I think it would be different
right.
if you had a
one-
formal publisher.
Yeah.
If you
Right.
if a publishing house said we'll come and take your book, then you would be assigned an editor. We were happy that we thought at first maybe this was only going to be a book for women, and it turned out that we had a male editor who very much liked it. But we didn't agree with him on, for example, he come back with his comments about certain things he thought could be changed. But we didn't agree with everything he said grammatically. We didn't agree with certain, for example, he didn't like that we mentioned specific brands in the book. And he wasn't too thrilled about the fact that we mentioned specific places. Now, we've gotten wonderful comments from people that they loved that we mentioned specific places in Westchester.
Well, it's set very much in Westchester, so certainly, I mean, we know in the public access world, people love to hear about people they know and places they know. That resonates. Do you think that you're limiting your audience by doing that? Limiting it to a Westchester regional audience?
I think for a first book, that's a possibility. I don't think it limits the book in any way. I think people would be interested, and maybe they'd even make a trip to Westchester. Who knows? But
Go to the City Limits Diner?
Well,
exactly.
we're going to be doing a book signing at City Limits Diner
What fun.
because they were thrilled that we mentioned it. But just to go back for a second, I really like Lisa Scottolini and I really like Linda Fairstein as authors. And Lisa Scottolini sets hers in Philadelphia, suburbs of Philadelphia, and you see all the local places. To me, it gives it more richness. And with Linda Fairstein, whom I really like as an author, I've learned so much about New York City, and the research that she's done is wonderful. So to me, it makes it come alive more. I think maybe subconsciously that was going on in my mind.
Is there a community of women authors or lady lawyer authors?
Not that I know of, no.
I wonder, have you reached out to Linda Fairstein?
There is a community on the internet of authors, women, men, first-time authors. And so if you do your research, you'll find that there's a large community, and they share a lot of their ideas and their experiences of self-publishing. And so it gave me a lot of more insight to what we needed to do with the book and where we needed to go with it.
Really?
But we did reach out to Linda. And I actually know her brother, who's an attorney. And she took the novel, and we're waiting to hear some comments back from her. And she sent one of her novels to us. So it was it was fun.
It would seem that kind of, I don't know if that's a more female thing than male thing, I don't know. It's just that we do tend to network a lot.
Right.
And reach out personally. I mean, how many times a day do I get an overture from somebody, asking for help with something or other, and vice versa. I could be wrong, but I don't think men do that quite as much.
I think when it comes to writing, I think we all want to find out a better way to do something. And with this community that is out there, and through CreateSpace as well, you can go on their website and find out a lot of information, but there's also other ones. And there's also other websites that will help you give you points on how to write a book and how to outline. And when we wrote this book, we winged it. We were flying by the seat of our pants because we had never written one before. So we just had a story to tell, and we probably could have shortened the time span it took to write the book, but we did it our way. So
I don't think that's, I mean, any author will tell you it takes as long as it takes, and sometimes you hit a roadblock and sometimes it just comes. I mean, I don't think that's,
Right.
you also both have active lives
right,
and businesses.
exactly.
And
So we
But we learned a lesson, and I think we've learned a lesson, which is we didn't have an outline. I mean, I go back to, you know, high school, college, law school. When you were writing anything, you had to have some idea. We didn't do that, and I kept thinking in my head, why are we not having an outline? We probably wrote the equivalent of a book and a half, and then had to
more.
cut, or more, and then had to cut it down.
so in your next book, will you have an outline?
We do, and
Okay.
we're working on it.
But I've talked to lots of authors, and there is no uniformity in style. Some people do have a roadmap, and some people do not. And it just evolves.
some way you just have to have that story evolve in your mind. This final story didn't come out until I dreamt it, and so that's how it came about.
Did your mom ever come back to you?
She did. She didn't often. She would come to Noel more than she would me.
did. She
yeah,
did.
She would show her, you know, not show herself, but she would leave little tidbits of innuendos and just, you know, anything that she'd see here on the radio or anything of that nature. But she came to me in a dream one time, and being my mother who she was, she sat me down, and I was transported back into my childhood home with the old colonial furniture and the dog sheets on them, and we were sitting there, and my mother looked at me and she says, "I don't like the way that you portrayed me in the book." And I went, "Well, Mom," I said, "but everybody loves you." I said, you got your fiery spirit going. I said, you're helping people. I said, what's not to like? And so she said, "Well, when you put it that way, I like the book a lot." So, and she goes, "In here, you know, let me make some tidbits of information for you. I'll give you some pointers." And that came to me in a dream.
Oh, how lovely that it worked out,
yeah.
that she modified her stance.
What was,
did, yes.
what
Gave
was
you
great
permission.
too is that I never met Maggie's mother. She was dead long before I met Maggie, but she was such a vibrant person. When Maggie would describe her, she wasn't
Easy.
difficult to write at all. She was easy to write. We tried at one point to get Maggie's father in there, and no matter how hard I tried, he was quiet apparently and sort of a gray figure. I couldn't get him. I couldn't grab onto him. Every time I'd write about him, it would end up being about Fanny.
So,
And that probably was their relationship. And from what you
Exactly.
feel in the book,
He
he
was
was
the
kind of a
quiet,
quieter person,
reserved.
overshadowed by her
Yes.
big personality.
that she had.
That's right.
So, Noel, so I get the sense you did most of the writing, and you, Maggie, did most of the directing.
Directing, storyline, editing, going through how the story was going to unfold. I'm the idea person, and she's the writer, and then we collaborate. After she writes, then we get together and we do that.
And you get to critique.
I do.
It's a
do.
good job. Good
It
gig.
works. It works
It
well.
worked.
Now, do you
works well.
find being a lawyer, Noel, helped you or hindered you?
Oh, I think helped.
In
I
what way?
definitely think helped.
In what way?
First of all, a lot of what I do is writing contracts, writing briefs, making a point, getting your point across. I'd like to think I do that well in my law practice. Sometimes you want to come on strong. Sometimes you want to come on a little less strong. So the gradations of how to word things, I think that's a big help. And certainly, people have asked me, the villain in the story, Steve Goldrick, is he one person? Is he one attorney? I said, no, he's the compilation of obnoxious attorneys I've met over the course of 30 years. But he was easy to write. He was so easy to write. That one chapter where we first introduce him, and that's a fairly long chapter, we wrote that one Sunday afternoon at Maggie's house. It just came out.
Well, you know what surprises me? Lawyers are not usually known to be good writers. And I mean, I'm not, I say this from experience. I mean, they do what they have to do, but it's often pretty mechanical. And they can track the language of a statute and do the things they need to do, but they're not generally creative. And those who are creative usually have a great deal of frustration practicing law. Now, you don't seem to have frustration in your practice. In fact, you speak of it with great enthusiasm. So it's not like you're fleeing from the restrictions of law practice. It seems to have just been, the writing just seems to be an outgrowth of what you do.
I would say that's true. I would also say for many years I did matrimonial work. And when you do the affidavits in a matrimonial, you want to tell a story. You want it to be vivid. You want it to come across that you want the reader, who's the judge or the judge's law secretary, you want it to stick in their minds as to what you're saying. So I had one client many years ago who said to me, "I didn't know my life was this interesting until I read this affidavit."
Now, you know, you talk about Steve being an easy character to write, even though he's a compilation of many lawyers. Bad guys usually are easier to write. I mean, you can really let loose. Do you find that you've met lots of bad guys over the years?
I like the people I work with. I mean, I primarily practice in Westchester, but there are the pompous ones. And many of them are in New York City, I have to say. More of them are in New York City than in Westchester. But I've met my fair share. I've met my fair share of chauvinists. You know, I started practicing at 24. I looked young. They thought they were going to walk all over me. And if they're going to walk all over me, they're going to walk all over the client. So that wasn't going to happen.
There weren't a lot of lady lawyers in those days
No, there were
either.
not. There were not. I think we said when we were just talking generally before we started, I graduated from Fordham, and the year before me, the women were 8% of the class. We were 16% of the class. Then it went to 20% and continued growing. But we were definitely a minority. But I don't actually feel in law school we were discriminated against. Once I got out practicing, I think the fact that I was a young woman didn't necessarily help.
Honey, go home and ask your boss whether he wants to. I remember getting that a few times.
Yes, yes.
Now tell me this, do you find that your colleagues take you less seriously as a lawyer because you've written a novel?
No.
You don't feel that way, and you don't find that so. People saying, you know, what is your career?
Yeah, well, my career is physical therapy, massage, and fitness, and so it's a wonderful field that I'm in, and I get to meet extraordinary people, and every single one of my patients and clients has been just enthusiastic, supportive. I've had no issues at all, no
and
difficulties
even
at all.
lawyers don't say, "Are you leaving your practice?"
Oh, no.
Nobody's ever said that?
They, the people, like, we have to do continuing legal education. So I run into people that I know from various areas. How you doing, Noel? Fine. What are you doing? I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And I have to I always throw in, and I wrote a novel. Did you know I wrote a novel? And we have nice little cards. I hand them out, and these people buy the novels and call me up and say, we liked it. So not everyone, but a lot of the attorneys I know, yes.
Do some attorneys ask if they're in the book?
No one has asked. Honestly, no one has asked.
And how about clients? Now, I mean, you talk about, you do a lot of matrimonial work. Now, I don't want to give everything away. We've given a brief synopsis. I don't want to do spoiler alert, but have you worked with people who traffic in babies?
There were attorneys who were always suspected of doing it in years past. Many years ago, I did adoption work, agency adoption work for the Catholic Home Bureau. But with the private adoptions, those agency adoptions have become few and far between. But there were people that were always suspected of doing this, and they could never quite get them. So I guess that came from the back of my mind from years past.
But nobody's come forward and said, "How dare you?"
Oh no.
Or
No.
You know, or you've used my story. Or how about clients? I mean, nobody's worried that you're going to use some of their lives or some of their stresses in your writing. Nobody's expressed
Not
concern.
yet. No. In fact, the clients have been enthusiastic. When I said, I sent out an email when it first came out. We got lots of people. Oh, we loved it. If we buy it, will you sign it for us? Absolutely. I'm thrilled to sign it for you.
Especially if you're going to buy it.
That's right.
Pay
Exactly.
money for it.
Yes.
How about, do you have colleagues or friends who pitch you stories, ideas?
Not yet.
Not yet. No.
There's a few people who do say, "Can you put me in the next book?"
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Who was it? Nelson DeMille that if you want your name, he'll if you donate a certain amount of money to charity, he'll put your name in the book. We're not at that level yet. So Alice, keep promoting us, and maybe we will be at that level.
Well, tell me a little bit about your next novel. Where is that taking us? Are we going to be in Westchester?
Somewhat.
Yes, somewhat.
Somewhat, and in
yes.
the Middle East.
Yes, in the Middle East.
In the
yes.
Middle East. We originally were going to do something completely different, a completely different story. And I started it. And then, as more and more people read the book, they're like, well, when's the sequel coming out? What's happening to these people? We like these people. I had one friend who said, I'm not going to read it I'm not going to read the sequel unless you tell me now that Jason is going to be okay, who's one of the characters in the novel.
And of course you said,
I said,
I can't tell you that.
I said, maybe. A definite maybe.
Oh, no. People set criteria on you. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about this. You're going to be in Westchester and the Middle East. That's quite a span.
Correct.
And is Franny coming back?
Yes, Franny's coming back, and
Fanny, I'm sorry.
Franny, Fanny, Fran. She was
Right, we used it
a lot of names.
interchangeably, right.
And so she comes back. Steve Goldrick comes back. There's another secret, and it just sort of snowballs into a few more, and there's other twists and turns. And
Now, in this one, you have an
there's-
outline.
And yes,
We're about
and there's
100 pages
There's
into it.
there's a kidnapping. So
Okay, you're going to send it to me, right? I mean, because now my appetite is really whetted for this. You're going to self-publish that one as well? Or do you think you're going to try to find a publisher?
we'd like to try and find a publisher, I believe.
Well, now
but-
you
but
are published authors, right?
So
I mean, you have some credibility.
I'm gonna
We're
put some
trying-
letters out there, but
We're trying to use some context too. You know, I mean, we recognize that the world runs somewhat on context, and we need somebody to open a door for us, a big door.
Publishing world is so difficult.
It
now.
is.
I mean, I know that. Well, I wish you the best of luck. I can't wait
thank
to
you.
see your second novel. This one, the first, Secrets Change Everything, a very good summer read. I highly recommend it. Maggie,
you so
Noel,
much,
thank you
Alice.
so much for being here. It's been
Thank
my
you.
pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for having
our
us.
pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Thanks so much.
I'm Alice Bloom. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.